So, so today I want to talk about the question, am I a safe person? So the reason I want to do this is that over the past year or so, I have received comments on social media as well as private messages, either asking me some questions, trying to figure out if I was safe or unsafe, or deciding and letting me know that I had been deemed an unsafe person and that this friend or person I knew would have to unfriend me on social media as well as in person, and that they would have to warn other people about me because I am unsafe. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about that a little bit before diving into some of the topics themselves that I want to explore. And it's the relationship between narratives, beliefs, and emotional safety. So, this is a very controversial, kind of emotionally charged topic. On the one side, you have people saying, "Oh, this is cancel culture. People need to grow up. Um, the truth will set you free. People just need to stop being so delusional. We need to all just get together and free speech, no censorship. We need to stop canceling each other, that sort of thing." On the other side, you have people saying this isn't about canceling at all. It's about protecting the vulnerable. It's about creating safety, creating safe spaces. It's about caring. It's about empathy. And those who say otherwise are uncaring or just don't understand that what we're doing here is creating protection and connection and safety. So I don't really agree with either of those pre-packaged narratives, basically. I have a slightly different perspective, and that's what I want to talk about today. So when I first heard, the idea that I am unsafe and that I need to be canceled or blocked or deleted or warned against, I had an instant emotional reaction. Who wouldn't, right? It definitely it reminded me of, the idea of shunning or excommunication in spirituality or in religion. So it brought up a whole wave of emotions. And I didn't want to form an opinion while I was very emotional about it. So I gave it some time to kind of move through that. And where I landed was that I actually do think that in some ways I am an unsafe person. And I'll elaborate on that a little bit. But first I want to tell a story that prompted this shift in my perspective. So I was living with a partner, and there was an incident where I was very, very emotional. It was an extremely stressful time for both of us. So we were both very emotional, in a very highly nervous system activated, triggered state all the time. And in the midst of this stressful period, I noticed that my cat was sick. That's actually her right here. She's right here. So let's, since we're talking about you, why don't you make a quick appearance here? This is Rania. This is my girl Rania. And as you can see, she's fine. But at the time, she seemed to be very sick. I was finding blood around the house and near the litter box, and I panicked. I love that cat, and I was absolutely freaked out. So I went, I don't even know how to describe it. I was a wreck. And I panicked, tried to call vets, tried to get her an appointment, hopefully save her life. And as I was on the phone, my partner at the time kept coming up and putting their hand on me, on my shoulder, and it felt really uncomfortable. I didn't want it. I wanted to focus on making that appointment, getting my cat taken care of. I wanted to be with my fear and my grief, and I couldn't stand having another person touching me at that time. So I said, please don't touch me. Like, I first non-verbally, since I was on the phone, I would, try to negotiate space, try to move away, and it didn't work. My partner kept touching me, and I left the room. I went to another room. They followed me into the room, and kept touching my shoulders, my arms, and my neck. And I eventually, turned around and, stopped the phone call and said, like, stop touching me. I really don't want to be touched. Please stop touching me. And then I left and went into another room, and they followed me again and continued to come up to me and touch me. I left again, went to another room. And as they approached me again to provide even more touch, and maybe I should say that the touch felt like there's touch that feels like giving, and then there's touch that feels like taking. This felt taking to me. It felt like there was energy taken from me whenever there was that touch, and that's one of the reasons I was just very like, I can't have that experience right now. You need to stop touching me. And so when I had moved to the third room and my partner approached again to touch, I turned around while I was on the phone and I threw out my hand like this and I said, stop. I was very forceful. I was very direct and, made that motion with my hand. Now we were about, I would say maybe 10, 12 feet apart. My partner at the time was on the other side of the room. And then they stumbled. So there was this moment where all of a sudden, as I made that movement, as I said, stop, in this very forceful sort of way, my partner actually tripped backwards and was about to fall. And it looked as if, they had just been shoved, basically. So that the force of my no and that movement just impacted them in such a way that I kind of stumbled backwards. And then I forgot about that incident. And after we separated, I found out through, it doesn't matter how, but I heard that my partner was saying that I had been abusive and that they were now traumatized because of the way that I had abused them in our relationship. And one of the examples that my former partner cited was physical assault. So when I asked, when did I physically assault you? Like, where is this? Why do you, like, where are you coming from? They cited that scenario. And, so, that was, okay, let me slow down for a moment here. That was very emotional for me. As you can imagine, I'm sure, hearing this from somebody that I had been very close to and where there had been a lot of intimacy and trust, and then suddenly hearing the story that I had been the one who had committed a physical assault was extremely jarring. And my first reaction was wanting to convince them otherwise. So I immediately wanted to argue and defend myself and say, maybe even reverse it and say, you're the one who kept touching me. If anyone assaulted anyone here, it's you. And if anyone was abusive, it's you because you didn't respect my boundaries. So I allowed myself all of those emotions and those impulses, but I did not bring them to my former partner. So I worked through those in ritual and in private and with another person supporting me through it. And what I realized after I had moved through all of these emotions of fear and betrayal and anger and frustration and all these emotions that came up was that in their mind, in my ex-partner's mind, that is what happened. So my assumption is that the part of them that was looking for touch was probably a young part. They were probably coming from a young part of the self. And in that moment where I rebuffed and rejected that part, I saw in the way that they stumbled and in the way their face changed, I'm assuming that they switched to a different part of the self that experienced this rejection so suddenly. And my understanding is that this new part that switched in that moment wasn't aware of the backstory and wasn't aware of why I was doing that. Didn't even remember that, there had been no physical contact, that we had distance. And so for that part, all they experienced was this sudden stumbling back, losing their footing, and all the associated emotions with it. And so they filled in the experience and created this narrative that they had just been physically assaulted by me, and then ran with that narrative. And so what I came to realize is that from the place where this person is at the time, they need that story to be true. So it's not true in the physical realm. There was distance, there was no physical contact that happened. But I do believe that in order to work through this experience, my ex-partner needs to be met in that narrative. So I'm not the person to do that. For me, that's impossible, since I end up taking a role in that narrative that I don't want, that is not true. And so I can't be the person to meet them in that story. But I do believe that they need to be met in that story, and that what would really be beneficial is for someone to not argue with that narrative, to let that be true for them in that way, regardless of how it misaligns with the physical realm and what actually happened, and then work through that experience and what it was like for them from within this false narrative. So I'm telling that story because it shaped and informed my belief around narratives. I believe that we need stories that are false at times. If the only way I can really honor my experience and the impact an event or another person has had on me is through a story that is untrue, that is not aligned with what happened in the physical realm, but it powerfully and accurately expresses my emotional experience and how I was impacted, then I think that story, that narrative, serves an important purpose. And I don't want to take that story away. So I want, in this case, I want my ex-partner to be able to have that story. This is one of the reasons why we are not in touch anymore, because in order for them to have that story and have that be true for them, I can't be in relationship. I can't be connected. But I want people to be able to have the story that they need in order to honor the fullness of their emotional experience and the impact something has had on them. So, coming back to the topic of safety, I believe that in a way, I was unsafe for my partner in that moment where they need this untrue story and I need a story that paints me in a more realistic light and that honors my role in the event that actually happened. So by my insistence on a story that's more aligned with reality, if we had stayed connected, so if there had been an ongoing attachment and an ongoing attempt to stay in relationship, I think we would have been unsafe for one another. They would have been unsafe for me because I would be questioning my own reality. I would be doubting, maybe gaslighting myself over what really happened, or I would be trying to pressure them into aligning their narrative with what actually happened. But I also think that they would have been unsafe because I would have created a pressure on them to conform to a narrative that didn't allow them to hold the fullness of their experience. Um, yeah. So, so when I'm getting these messages, so moving out of this example, when I'm getting these messages from friends who are saying, "Are you safe? Are you safe?" And what they're really asking is, "Do you still agree with these beliefs and narratives that you used to hold? And if you don't, then you are unsafe." I actually think there's something to it. I think there is truth in that. I think it's true for a different reason than these friends of mine or people I know would maybe the way they would maybe explain it to themselves or to others. I think I have a different story for it, but I do think there is a sense of unsafety because leaving a narrative behind, moving out of a particular way of looking at one's own experience is a really big deal, and it requires a lot of support. It requires a context where one can face any emotions that come up, where one can face any shame that comes up around having believed the wrong thing. And Yeah, so it requires the kind of context where that can happen. And if I'm the one who creates pressure to leave the current narrative behind, and that narrative that a person I care about is holding, and that's the only way they can currently conceptualize and hold their own experience, then that pressure from me, whether it's intentional on my part or not, is something that that person would want to avoid. So I understand being canceled, so to speak, for that reason, and being unfriended for that reason. Because if the context isn't there, if the resources aren't there, and if it's too difficult to try to understand one's experience through a different narrative, then I do think that staying away from someone like me who's coming from a different narrative is a good idea. Um, I don't actually think that it necessarily matters which narrative is true, in the sense that, say, if my narrative is false, okay, so my story has changed, and I believe that it has changed because I have gone through post-traumatic growth, and that it changed because I learned things and I've become more mature and I've developed a deeper understanding, and I've come to a narrative that holds a lot more nuance and that is more closely aligned with reality. But pulling someone in that direction, creating this gravitational pull towards that narrative when that person is not ready and is not resourced to deal with the impact of having their current narrative shattered. It's similar to if I were coming from this new narrative from a place of confusion. So say my narrative changed, not because I've grown, not because I've become more mature, not because I've basically upgraded, but say I had whatever, I was triggered, or it's because of trauma. I've been through a lot and I've been deceived, and maybe it's fear distorting my thinking or what have you. And so I left the true story and created a new one that's actually less true. Then I would still pose a threat if the person who's holding on to a more true story isn't secure in that story. So for whatever reason, even if they're holding the real story and the true story that's much more aligned with reality than mine, if they're not secure in it, and my story throws them off course, then I'm also not safe. So either way, the gravitational pull, either closer towards reality or further away, either way, if the other person is not ready to move in either, well, or to relate to someone in either direction and allow themselves to be impacted by a different story, then creating that distance and not engaging is something that I actually support. Let me see. Is there anything else I want to say? I don't think so. So that's my take on, am I a safe person? Like, yes and no. It depends. If it is safe for someone to engage with a narrative that maybe doesn't match theirs, and they don't end up abandoning their own experience, and they can be with the difference between their narrative and mine and explore that without going into crisis or losing themselves or abandoning a part of themselves, then yeah, I'm safe. If that's not the case and that difference is a source of self-abandonment, then I would say no, I'm not safe, and I would absolutely recommend not engaging with me and creating space and distance for self-protection. Yeah, so that's my take on narratives and safety and whether or not I am a safe person. Thanks for listening.